they are effectively saying they are worried about Burnham bounce.
Yes.
And that somebody who's seen as much sort of more of a soft left figurehead leading the Labour Party is going to stem the tide of people that are moving from Labour to the Greens. That would suggest, I think, that there's concern that there is a kind of ceiling that the Green Party is reaching.
Yes.
And like Reform, they're finding that momentum that they'd sort of built up has slightly stalled, and they're trying to figure out what the change in Prime Minister means for how they can try and find it again.
Right now, politics here. The Times is now reporting that the leader of the Green Party, Zack Polanski, is facing pressure from within his party, from activists, to be more left-wing. Senior grassroots figures are said to be worried that they're not doing enough to raise their party's popularity since Andy Burnham came in as Prime Minister. Aubrey Allegretti is the author of this. He's the chief political correspondent of the Times. Hello to you, Aubrey.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi. So we've got Green activists who are worried about losing support to Burnham's Labour. Just tell us more.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story, this. I mean, we are obviously a month into Andy Burnham's premiership, and one of the big questions about the reconfiguration of politics and political allegiances is how much is somebody who was seen as being the figurehead of the kind of soft left of the Labour Party been able to stem what was a sort of considerable loss of voters on the left of Labour to rival parties like the Greens. And there's been a motion that's been put forward by 4 or 5 senior Green sort of grassroots activists, one who's on the Green Party Council, another a councillor themselves, and they are effectively saying that they think that a Burnham bounce is very, very likely. They think that the Greens have already seen a dip in support, evidenced by only getting 12% in the Greater Manchester mayoral by-election, and they basically want the Green Party to rewrite the rules that it gives to local organisers to put much more front and centre some of the Greens' big national policies that they think will help differentiate it from Labour, i.e. they think currently they're being too timid by talking about local issues, when actually they need to try and convince more of those sort of Labour-inclined voters who could be convinced to come over to the Greens to back them, because Andy Burnham isn't going to be enough of a change.
Right, so if these radical activists, or we want to see a shift to the left to try and bring back those who've drifted back to the Labour Party, what would that mean in policy terms?
So they have basically 3 specific requests for what they think should be on the sort of local campaign material. So think, for example, leaflets in council elections, of which there are quite a high number that happen outside of the normal electoral cycle due to by-elections. Their basic sort of 3 requests are promoting the Greens policy of a wealth tax, which I think is levied on 1% of assets over £10 million and 2% over £10 billion. Zack Polanski says that can raise between £15 billion and £25 billion. And so it is Green policy, but they effectively think that the party's being too timid about promoting it in those local elections. The other asks are that they much more strongly criticise Labour over allowing the continued sale of a lot of arms to Israel, and of course the government's stance on tackling climate change, which the Green Party argue is effectively sort of too slow and not ambitious enough. So those are their kind of 3 big asks for trying to show voters that Andy Burnham isn't sort of this kind of big panacea for people who might be swayed to the Greens.
Right, so I guess while the Labour government under Andy Burnham agonises about whether to just open up the North Sea gas and oil fields to whatever extent, the Green Party, certainly among these activists, their viewers don't even think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, the heart of this story, what is so interesting is to hear in these sort of senior grassroots figures' own words, the level of concern there is within the party about, I'm trying to find the exact wording now, but they describe it as a period of stagnation. They basically say that there were obviously big gains for the Greens after Zack Polanski became leader last September, most notably, obviously, increasing its membership base by more than 3-fold, and then in electoral terms, winning things like the Gorton and Denterne by-election earlier this year, and then coming second in the local elections in terms of percentage vote share, beating both Labour and the Tories. But they are effectively saying they are worried about Burnham bounce.
Yes.
And that somebody who's seen as much sort of more of a soft left figurehead leading the Labour Party is going to stem the tide of people that are moving from Labour to the Greens. That would suggest, I think, that there's concern that there is a kind of ceiling that the Green Party is reaching.
Yes.
And like Reform, they're finding polling, that momentum that they'd sort of built up has slightly stalled, and they're trying to figure out what the change in Prime Minister means for how they can try and find it again.
Right, and the polls, a selection of polls, tell us that Labour has lost support back from the Greens. But I guess the worry for Labour, perhaps, is this question of momentum. Things are going, or have been going, in the right direction for Burnham so far, but if he falters, and there are tough times coming for the government, well, the very same defectors could possibly re-defect again.
Absolutely, yes. We've seen, I mean, one of the big lessons of sort of recent political history is voters are becoming increasingly more volatile and less tribal. They used to vote for parties based on their own voting history and sometimes often their parents' voting history. And there were very sort of few swing voters. There's been so much more volatility recently that in 2019 we saw huge swathes of the country in the Red Wall that had previously backed Labour vote for the Conservatives in areas that never had done so before. And the same phenomenon replicated in 2024, where Labour were the beneficiaries of winning seats where they had previously never expected to win in sort of rural heartlands for decades, controlled by the Conservatives. And there is that question about how long the sort of anti-Burnham honeymoon is going to last. You hear some MPs say that they are basically giving him till September the 1st to kind of get his feet under the table and learn where the loos are. They're not all in Manchester, as how one former minister quipped to me recently. But they are basically concerned that he hasn't been truly tested yet. Parliament's been in recess. He hasn't been scrutinised very much by journalists either, because he doesn't have to be, because he's kind of able to sort of decide what interviews he gives when. And a lot of the big sort of fundamental issues have been kicked down the track. That's whether that's sort of social care, deciding not to make big progress on it until after the Casey review next year, or, you know, other issues. So I think they are concerned that ultimately it's good that Burnham's inherited a little bit more popularity and drawn level pegging with Reform in the polls. That's definitely a success in Labour MPs' view. But they're concerned that it's all still quite a fragile sort of truce.
All right, Aubrey, great to talk to you. Aubrey Allegretti, the chief political correspondent for The Times. Now, coming up here after 5 o'clock, we're going to be talking about the transfer of this vast trove of battlefield data from Ukraine to the United Kingdom. I'm going to be talking to the Times World Affairs editor, Catherine Philp, and get her thoughts on all of this. We've also been talking about the possibility or the threat of Russian retaliation against Britain. Well, turns out another one of our adversaries, Iran, attacked a British energy facility. We're going to be talking about that too. And Donald Trump, the face-off with Canada, it goes on, it deepens. Did he really say he wanted to rename Lake Ontario as Lake America? Well, the answer is yes, he did. But before that, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian leader, her pollster, is going to be talking to me about the lessons from Italy for British Conservatives. Times now is 4:51. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio.